In this episode, we move into a distinction that matters a great deal in real defensive work, even though the two terms can sound abstract when you first hear them. Passive vulnerability detection and active vulnerability detection are both ways of learning where weaknesses may exist, but they gather that knowledge in very different ways and create different strengths, risks, and blind spots. Passive detection learns by observing what is already happening in the environment, while active detection learns by deliberately interacting with systems to test, probe, or inspect them more directly. That may sound like a small difference, but it changes how much visibility you get, how much impact you might create, and how closely your view matches either normal system behavior or deliberate security testing. For a beginner, the easiest mental model is that passive detection listens and watches, while active detection knocks on doors and asks questions, and both approaches can be valuable depending on the kind of answer a security team needs. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Passive vulnerability detection is based on observation rather than direct engagement. Instead of sending scans, opening many new connections, or forcing systems to respond to a battery of checks, passive methods collect information from traffic flows, system logs, existing communications, telemetry platforms, and normal operational patterns. A passive tool might notice that a server is using an old protocol, that a workstation is communicating in a way associated with outdated software, or that certain devices on the network expose telltale behavior that suggests weak configuration or unsupported operating systems. The key point is that the environment reveals information through its ordinary activity, and the security team learns by capturing and interpreting that evidence. Because passive detection depends on visibility into live behavior, it is often closely tied to network monitoring, endpoint monitoring, and centralized analysis platforms. That makes it especially useful in environments where aggressive probing is risky, politically sensitive, or likely to disrupt systems that must remain stable. Active vulnerability detection is more direct and usually easier for new learners to picture because it aligns with the traditional idea of a scanner. Instead of waiting for systems to reveal themselves during normal operation, active methods intentionally interact with hosts, services, applications, and devices to collect information about what is present and whether known weaknesses may exist. That interaction might include checking open ports, identifying service versions, requesting banners, comparing responses to known vulnerability patterns, or inspecting internal configuration data when authorized credentials are available. Active detection is often more deliberate, structured, and repeatable because it follows planned checks rather than depending on what happens to be visible in the moment. The trade-off is that the security team is creating new activity in the environment rather than simply observing existing activity. And that means the process can consume resources, trigger alerts, expose access problems, or affect fragile systems if it is not handled carefully. In most organizations, when people casually say vulnerability scanning, they are usually thinking of active detection. The difference between passive and active methods matters because defenders are rarely asking only one simple question. Sometimes the question is what weaknesses can be seen from the outside or what software appears to be running on a device right now. And active detection is often strong in those situations because it can systematically test large numbers of systems against known conditions. Other times the question is what risks can be inferred from normal behavior without touching sensitive infrastructure, and passive detection may be the safer and more realistic choice. A hospital, utility, factory, or transportation network may contain devices that cannot tolerate heavy probing, and security teams in those environments often need a way to gain awareness without increasing operational danger. Even in less fragile business settings, there are cases where observation provides insight that active scanning would miss, especially when systems are transient, mobile, or visible only during certain types of communication. Good analysts learn early that choosing a method is not about habit or convenience alone. It is about matching the detection approach to the environment, the mission, and the operational risk. Passive detection depends heavily on context because it only knows what it has a chance to observe, If a device is powered on but quiet, or if a service rarely communicates, passive monitoring may not gather enough evidence to identify the asset, much less infer its vulnerabilities. That means passive detection can be powerful but also incomplete, especially in low-traffic segments or environments where visibility is fragmented across multiple tools. Still, when the right data is available, passive methods can be surprisingly revealing because devices often expose their identity through protocol behavior, traffic timing, version clues, certificate details, or communication patterns that defenders learn to recognize. Passive tools can also observe relationships between systems, which helps analysts understand how assets interact rather than just whether a particular port is open. This becomes valuable when vulnerability analysis is tied to business process understanding, because risk is not only about a weakness on a single box, but also about where that box sits in the wider network, what it talks to, and how much damage compromise could cause. Active detection, by comparison, is usually better at forcing clarity when the environment is quiet or incomplete. A scanner does not have to wait for a host to speak naturally if it is allowed to initiate the conversation itself. It can reach out to a range of addresses, inspect exposed services, verify which ports respond, compare answers against expected patterns, and collect details at a speed and scale that would be difficult through passive listening alone. If credentials are available, the scanner may gather much deeper evidence by inspecting installed software, missing patches, and insecure settings from inside the system. That directness is one reason active detection remains central to many vulnerability management programs. At the same time, that same directness means the organization is introducing deliberate traffic, deliberate inspection, and sometimes deliberate stress, so the activity must be scheduled, controlled, and interpreted carefully. Beginners sometimes assume more activity always means better data, but more interaction can also mean more noise, more operational coordination, and greater chance of unintended effects. One of the clearest strengths of passive detection is safety in delicate environments. Systems and operational technology, OT, industrial control systems, ICS, and supervisory control and data acquisition, SCADA. Environments often support physical processes that cannot be interrupted casually, and even well-intentioned probing may create timing issues, instability, or unexpected behavior. Passive techniques are attractive there because they allow defenders to observe communications, identify devices, and infer security weaknesses without placing extra burden on the assets themselves. The same logic can apply to medical devices, legacy business platforms, and specialized appliances whose vendors warn against aggressive scanning. Passive detection is not risk-free because the monitoring infrastructure still needs to be placed correctly and interpreted well, but it generally avoids the more obvious danger of directly interrogating fragile equipment. That makes it a useful choice when stability is the first priority. From a beginner standpoint, this is an important reminder that good security work is not only about finding weaknesses. It is also about finding them in a way that does not break the very systems you are trying to protect. A major strength of active detection is precision through deliberate testing. When a team wants broad coverage on a schedule, active methods are often the more dependable way to get a consistent picture across many assets. A well-run scan can check large address ranges, compare findings to updated vulnerability knowledge, and produce reports that map directly to remediation workflows, ownership assignments, and tracking systems. Active detection also makes it easier to repeat the same evaluation over time so that analysts can compare results and see whether patching, configuration changes, or exposure reductions have actually improved the environment. Passive methods can contribute to that picture, but they are more dependent on whether relevant traffic or behavior appears in the monitoring window. That means active detection is usually stronger for routine measurement, compliance support, and formal vulnerability management cycles. The important caveat is that strong coverage does not automatically mean perfect truth, because scanners can still misidentify software, overestimate exploitability, or report findings that require human validation before a business decision is made. Another useful way to understand the difference is to think about stealth and visibility. Passive detection is generally quieter from the standpoint of the monitored systems because it is not constantly initiating contact or probing for responses. The systems continue doing what they were already doing, and the security team learns by being present where that activity can be seen. Active detection is much more visible because it creates distinct patterns of connections, requests, and checks that may show up in logs, alerts, and performance data. In fact, a well-monitored environment may recognize active scanning almost immediately because it looks different from ordinary business traffic. That visibility is not necessarily bad, since the scanning is authorized, but it does affect how defenders coordinate with operations teams and how analysts explain what other monitoring tools are seeing. For students, this distinction also helps clarify the attacker perspective. Malicious reconnaissance often includes active probing, but sophisticated adversaries also rely on passive observation. So defenders benefit from understanding both the noisy and quiet ways information can be gathered about a target. Neither method is complete on its own, and this is where many misconceptions begin. Some people assume passive detection is inherently safer and therefore always better, but safety without enough evidence can leave major blind spots. If a vulnerable device does not generate traffic during the observation period, passive monitoring may not recognize it in time for remediation. Others assume active detection is inherently superior because it produces fuller reports, but those reports may still be inaccurate in places, may miss transient assets, or may be impossible to run safely in certain environments. An active scanner may tell you what it could reach and test, but it may not understand the ordinary communication patterns or business dependencies that passive observation reveals. Mature analysis requires accepting that every method is shaped by what it can see, how it gathers that visibility, and what kind of environment it is operating in. Once beginners understand that, they stop asking which method is universally best and start asking which method is best suited to the question at hand. False positives and false negatives appear in both approaches, just for different reasons. A passive platform may infer that a device is vulnerable because its observed behavior matches an outdated protocol pattern, even though compensating controls or hidden updates reduce the real risk. An active scanner may identify a vulnerable service banner that suggests an unpatched application, while the system is actually protected by a backported fix that the banner does not reflect clearly. On the other side, passive monitoring may miss a quiet asset entirely, and active scanning may miss weaknesses that exist only under particular runtime conditions or business workflows that its checks do not trigger. That is why vulnerability detection should be thought of as evidence gathering rather than absolute proof. Analysts build confidence by correlating multiple signals, validating important findings, and considering system context before deciding what deserves urgent action. The more critical the asset or the more disruptive the potential remediation, the more important that validation step becomes. Good defenders are careful not to confuse a detection result with a final conclusion. Passive detection often shines when it is combined with broader monitoring capabilities such as security information and event management, SIEM, network detection and response, NDR, or endpoint detection and response, EDR, platforms. Those technologies can collect telemetry over time and help analysts see unusual behavior, outdated communication styles, or asset characteristics that suggest vulnerability or poor security hygiene. The advantage here is that the security team is not performing vulnerability management in isolation. Instead, it is learning from real activity, which can reveal not just that a weakness might exist, but also whether the related system is actively used, how it interacts with other assets, and whether suspicious behavior is occurring alongside the suspected weakness. That can help with prioritization because not every vulnerable system carries the same practical risk. A passive signal tied to a heavily connected business-critical device may deserve more attention than a similar signal from a low-value isolated asset. For CySA Plus learners, this is a strong example of why security analysis is about combining evidence streams rather than treating every finding as if it exists in a vacuum. Active detection often fits best into structured vulnerability management programs because it can be planned, repeated, measured, and reported in a disciplined way. A team can define scan windows, scope targets, assign owners, compare results month over month, and build remediation processes around the outputs. This is one reason active methods are so common in enterprise security operations, especially for traditional information technology environments where systems are expected to tolerate routine assessment. When those assessments include credentialed access, the team may gain even better insight into missing patches, insecure configurations, and unsupported software versions that would never be obvious from passive observation alone. Still, active detection works best when paired with sound governance. The scope must be accurate, the timing must respect operations, the credentials must be protected, and the results must be reviewed by people who understand both the technical details and the business impact. Without that discipline, active scanning can become noisy, repetitive, or disconnected from actual risk reduction, which defeats the purpose of running it in the first place. In practice, strong security teams usually combine passive and active methods rather than choosing one forever. Passive detection can provide ongoing awareness, asset discovery clues, and insight into fragile or hard-to-scan environments, while active detection can provide deliberate coverage, deeper inspection, and repeatable measurement across managed systems. When the two methods align, confidence in the finding usually increases because different evidence sources are pointing to the same concern. When they disagree, that disagreement becomes useful in its own right because it tells the analyst where validation is needed. Perhaps a passive tool has seen behavior that a scanner missed, or perhaps the scanner has identified a configuration weakness that has not yet shown up in normal traffic. That tension helps analysts think more critically about what is truly exposed, what is merely present, and what matters most to the organization. For beginners, this is one of the most important professional habits to build, because defensive work is rarely about choosing a single data source and trusting it blindly. The real takeaway is that passive vulnerability detection and active vulnerability detection are different ways of answering the broader question of where risk may be hiding in an environment. Passive methods listen, observe, and infer from existing activity, which makes them especially useful when direct interaction is risky, unwanted, or operationally sensitive. Active methods probe, inspect, and test more deliberately, which makes them valuable for systematic coverage, repeatable assessment, and deeper investigation of managed systems. Neither method should be treated as a magic solution, because each one sees only part of the truth, and each one comes with trade-offs in coverage, safety, certainty, and context. When you understand how the two approaches differ, you are better prepared to interpret findings, explain their significance, and recommend the right next step instead of reacting mechanically to whatever a tool reports. That mindset is central to becoming a thoughtful analyst, because strong defense depends not just on collecting security data, but on understanding how that data was gathered and what it actually means.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.